So I'm Jean-Paul Lim, medical doctor. Did just a bit of a background because I think it helps set the stage to know who's talking to you. So again, I'm a medical doctor. I did all of my training here in Vancouver at UBC. I did a residency in internal medicine. I did an echocardiography fellowship. I did a longevity and anti-aging fellowship. And so I've always been passionate about preventative care, which I think is missing from our current medical system. Our current medical system is not funded for prevention, it is funded for reaction. When you have something, when you have a problem, we will then try to fix that problem, but not until you have that problem. And so that's always been my passion, and I've pursued avenues to develop my practice into that kind of practice where I can focus on prevention. And so along the same lines, I became a medical cannabis expert because I found that it did have medical utility, and I'm also an expert in psychedelic-assisted therapies. And so the reason that I share this background is because I want to let everybody know sort of where I'm from and how I want to explore human wellness. And human wellness is actually really complicated, as you could imagine, right? It didn't take one thing to make us unwell, and it certainly won't take one thing to make us well. So Andrew has advocated for hormones. That is one piece of the puzzle. You guys already have a personal trainer, Jake, and so I think that's great. That is another piece. But you can't ignore things that your doctor probably won't push, such as diet, okay? If you exercise and you take testosterone and you eat McDonald's every day, you know you're not gonna be well, right? And sleep, so these kinds of things are that I find that I emphasize and that I've put importance on. And so that sort of segues into my talk, which is hormones and longevity. What does it mean? Why does it matter? And I think that the latter part of that is going to hopefully open some of your eyes and educate you as to some of the things that you may be feeling that you didn't realize was actually a problem. You just thought that it was aging. And trust me, we all go through this, myself included. So just to give you a background of what ageless living, so my vision and my mission in ageless living is really to approach human wellness holistically. And as I alluded to, it isn't one thing that makes us unwell, so it can't be one thing that makes us well. So hormones is a pillar within ageless. The other pillars are biohacking. So what is biohacking? Very quickly, biohacking is using technologies to help the body heal from within, to promote inner healing. The idea behind it is that the body has an infinite ability to heal, but you just need a little bit of help sometimes. So things like hyperbaric chamber and photobiomodulation therapy, red light. Medical aesthetics to help keep youthful skin, and weight and nutrition. Again, huge importance in diet and weight and exercising, and IV vitamins. So that's how they all sort of fit together in this sort of jigsaw. Okay, and in the middle is longevity, and I'm going to speak to you guys about longevity and what that actually means, because a lot of it may be you see it thrown around a lot, and we may not fully understand what it means, and I'm going to define it. So the truth about hormones. So let's just talk about this. What is a hormone? So just very basic. It's a substance that's produced in one part of your body that acts on another part of the body and essentially helps regulate your body. Okay, it is essential to life. Typical hormones are things like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, but other things like thyroid, cortisol. Those are all hormones that produce in one place and act on another place. It is responsible for our balance in terms of our body's balance. Okay, and if they're not balanced, so if one is off, and even if the rest of them are okay, you don't feel right because you're not supposed to feel right. And that's the body sort of signaling you to say, hey, pay attention to me. The other things I want to define, what is bioidentical versus traditional? And that is chemically, from a chemical structure. Hormones, they work as a lock and key. You know how sometimes you have the same key made by the same manufacturer and you could put it into the keyhole, but you can't turn it, right? That's the difference between something that's identical and something that's similar. And so most of the pharmaceutical hormones are similar, which means like women specifically, there are some women here. So women specifically, there's this estrogen that you tend to be given by family doctors called Premarin. And it's actually not even human estrogen, okay, which is kind of weird, right? It's from a pregnant horse. And so the reason that that's important is like, you know, we sort of, when I heard of it, I was like, this is dumb. Like, why would anyone do this? Why would you give like a human something that's so fundamental to their identity and their well-being from a completely different species? And yet that's what we do because it's patentable. And so it's important to understand that the way hormones work, which is a lock and key, you could put the key in the lock because it's a similar shape, but does it turn it well? Or do you have to like pry it and just like reef on it in order to make it open? Okay, and that's important in order to maintain function. Why are hormones important? And so aging, and this will segue into the latter part of the talk, which is, why do we care about aging? I'm going to touch on that. But it's both internal and external aging. You can tell when someone's hormones are balanced. Like I have people, especially women, who we've balanced their hormones and they go out and they haven't seen their hairdresser or their friend in 6 to 8 months. And their comment is they look younger and they look more vibrant. And they haven't done anything else. They haven't done any aesthetic treatments. Okay? Same as men. Some of my men come to me. I had a tattoo artist come to me about a month ago because he said that when he saw one of his clients, who happens to be a patient of mine, both men, and he said that after he'd seen him for 8 months, he noticed that he had reversed aged. He said that he watched him through the years go from being single to getting married to having kids, and he aged each of those steps. And then for the first time, he said that this guy looked younger, and immediately he noticed it. And he said, well, what are you doing? And it was because it was all that he did was balance his hormones. Okay? So aging, mental health. I'm going to speak to this. Testosterone, most men, what do we think of testosterone when you, like, what are words that come to your mind when you think of testosterone? Like, what does it do for you?
Builds up bulk.
Bulk, right? Predominantly. That's what the media tells us, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger, all these professional athletes abuse testosterone. So everyone thinks testosterone must build muscle, right? I think that's I know that's what I thought before I got into this. But in actual fact, what I use it for personally is more for mental clarity. How many of us have felt in terms of motivation and drive that we're not the same as we were when we were 20? You know what I mean? As you were starting your career, as you were trying to go out and find, your partner or build your career or achieve certain milestones in life, you were driven. You went and took risks. You felt like you could conquer. And as we age, men, I'm talking specifically for men, it declines. And when you speak to anybody, they're like, oh, that's because you're getting old. Or, what else do they say? It's because you're a different part of your life. You entered a different phase in your life, right? But do you need to? That's the question, right? Do you need to? And that's what I'm trying to mention here is like age is simply a mentality, okay? You don't need to feel your chronologic age. Metabolism, very common. As we get older, we start putting some weight in our abdomen, we start getting a bit overweight, you get the dad bod. And so again, hormones play a huge role in that. Energy, sense of well-being. If you just look at this is all like fundamental to us being functioning, happy human beings, right? And I'm not just talking about like being superhuman. I'm just talking about us functioning as happy men and women. So what are some common symptoms? I'm not going to read them all, but generally, they're symptoms that we all associate with aging. right? Lack of motivation, lack of drive, lack of libido. Again, men don't like to talk about it, but erections, do you still get morning erections every morning? They're like, actually, as I think about it, I don't. Oh, well, I just thought that that's because I'm getting older. But then when you think about it, when you were 18, 20, 25, you're like, I had an erection every morning. I just thought that was a different part of my life. And again, these kinds of things, it's subtle, but it's cumulative. You know what I mean? It's cumulative in terms of its effects, because when you stop getting morning erections, it means that the next step is that your erections don't come as frequently. Then you start not getting as hard erections. And all of this sort of snowballs, which could be a sign of testosterone suppression, right? Weight gain. So all of these sort of things, again, that we just attribute to us getting older. And I think that's, men, we have it way easier than women because our symptoms tend not to get normalized. Women's symptoms get normalized for decades. Just because I feel like they're more in tune with their bodies, and men, we just tend to ignore things. But men get more attention, but I'm saying like most men don't even bother paying attention to this, right? Until, not to pick on Andrew, but until they get to a stage in their life where it's just so bad and you're just like, I need to do something. But I like to pick up people earlier. It's nice to see the profound effects when you're so far back, where you're so far, in the hole. It's nice, but my preference is like, how do you pick up people when they're 33, 28, and they feel good? The goal is, if I had known this when I was 28, I just want to stay feeling 28. I don't ever want to feel 40 or 50 or 60, right? So talking about it generally, I'm going to pick some hormones here because I think they serve as the foundation. So the foundation of hormones, to me, the base in terms of like a building is cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone. It is fundamental to life. If you had no cortisol in your body, you would actually die. And so how does it function? The function of cortisol is like it's a sprinter. It's meant to be given in short bursts and then to take away. Okay, and I'm going to explain why that's important. So just think of back in the day when we were hunters and gatherers. I give this example all the time because it's the easiest. So when you didn't have food or shelter, what does your body do? Physiologically, it secretes all of this cortisol, okay, so that you can stay awake, stay sharp, stay focused, right? So you can go hunt, get your food, then you're happy. Okay, usually that takes 2-3 days maybe, and so that's the spike. And what does it do in combination to that? It suppresses all of what I consider the non-life essential hormones. It'll suppress your testosterone because when you don't have food, you're not necessarily thinking of trying to procreate. You're trying to conserve your energy so you could go and survive. You're in survival mode. And the reason that that's important is two things. If you made Usain Bolt run a marathon, would he be good? No. He's got way too many fast twitch muscles, fast twitch fibers, right? Way too many. He's not going to last. And that's the way that the adrenal glands are for cortisol. And why is that important? It's important because as a society, we've evolved through the Industrial Revolution, through the digital revolution, where all of a sudden we're not actually having to go hunt. Right? So our food, we just go to the grocery store and you go buy it. Yes, the high interest rate environment now makes us struggle a little bit more, but generally we have food here in North America. But what do we have in exchange for that? Well, we have 9 to 5, sometimes longer, work, right? Digital revolution introduced what? Introduced actually 24-hour work. When do we ever shut off? Right? How many of us, before we go to bed, take a peek at our email on our phones and just like do last minute work before we, shut eye, right? And all of that has impact. And the way that it impacts us is that you've now made Usain Bolt a marathon runner. And so he doesn't have to run as fast because you don't get these peaks because you're not in this survival mode, right? But what it means is that you get this chronic low grade elevation what I call hyperactive adrenal glands. And what does it ultimately lead to? It leads to gradual suppression of these non-essential hormones, right? So your testosterone level starts to get depressed. Your thyroid level starts to get depressed, okay? And it goes into like, your body goes into like a conservation mode, okay? And that's what happens, but that can be changed. And it's important to realize this, because if you don't address it, just like if you don't watch Usain Bolt and as he crosses the half marathon, you look like, hey, he's gonna die, he's gonna clump. If you don't recognize that, he'll never make it to the finish line. Okay, so it's important to address these kinds of things, which is again sleep and stress management and exercising. And so here is, I mean, this graph or this picture is really meant to show the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, essentially it's this idea where the essential parts of our body's functioning are more important, and you need to fix that before you could build anything else upon it. Okay, so like self-fulfillment, you can't really build if you don't have your basic needs met. Right? If you're homeless, you're not necessarily thinking of these other things like self-fulfillment. And the same idea with hormones. You have to address them, and you have to address the foundational problems that exist. The next floor is what I consider is the thyroid. Okay, so the thyroid is responsible for our basal metabolic rate. It is, I'm sure Jake's told you this in terms of when you guys are exercising. The amount of calories that you burn in the actual activity isn't what you care most about. It's the calories that you burn after the activity because your basal metabolic rate has been increased. Okay? And the thyroid controls the basal metabolic rate. So people who have low thyroid function, they tend to gain weight. They tend to have dry skin, their hair tends to fall out, they have brittle hair. And so all of these are symptoms. Okay? And I'm gonna go through why you may be symptomatic and yet not realize it. Okay. The next step is your sex hormones. Okay. Testosterone for men, estrogen, progesterone for women, some growth hormone. And so you could see they have overlapping symptoms. Okay. Fatigue, libido, brain fog, all of this, especially fatigue, it's never just one thing. Right? And so this is just going through the symptoms. Okay, this is how I usually look at hormonal balancing, which is address the foundation and then be able to address the things on top of the foundation. Okay, it's like, yes, I can build the second floor, give you testosterone, but if I don't fix your adrenals, which is the real culprit to all of this, then what I'm essentially doing is I'm building something on weak foundation, and guess what? It's gonna crash. You're gonna need more and more, and you're not actually gonna fix the problem, okay? And so that's why I caution you, and Andrew pointed it out, you need to be looking for someone who does this sort of holistic practice so that you're not just looking at, oh, I'll just give you testosterone, right? And this is what happens in the gym. Like we all know people in the gym who says, hey, I can give you some testosterone, and what do? They stack this thing, and you just, how much, it's funny. I get these patients coming into me, mostly men who have gone to the gym and talked to people about this. They're like, I'd like my dose to go up. And I'm like, well, why? He goes, well, because my guy at the gym, he's taking like 3 times as much as me. I'm like, and? Well, shouldn't I be taking that much? I'm like, no, because everybody's different. Right? Everybody's body is different. And you can't just say, hey, I'm just gonna stack all these things, So there's a stack in the gym going on right now where you get like testosterone and an estrogen blocker and growth hormone, and you take these huge doses, and everybody gets the same dose. It doesn't matter if you're 6'5" through 250 pounds, or whether you're 5'8" and 170 pounds. It didn't matter, right? And again, the idea is like you need to be looking at the problem, right? The main problem isn't that you're just short in testosterone. You have to think, well, why? Why? And I have a patient whose low testosterone was driven by a pituitary tumor. That was why he was low. And so sure, I could give him a whole bunch of testosterone, but it didn't get to the underlying problem. So I love talking about this because this is something that we rarely talk about. And it's almost like I would encourage you to speak to your doctors about it, but kind of not. Because it's something that I actually never even learned in medical school, all right? Which is the idea of normal. Okay, so, and this is why I talk about some people maybe like have hormone problems and actually not even realize that they do. Normal, okay? So when you get a test, there's a range, okay? We've all seen it. If you look at your life lab results, okay, it's in the black, you're normal. What does that mean? Has anyone thought about that? Okay. Like a normal range is not meant for a person. Just like statistics were never meant for a person. Okay, you cross the street, you have a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting hit by a car. It doesn't actually matter. If you cross the street and get hit by a car, that stat meant nothing. It didn't mean you had to cross 10,000 times. It just meant that you crossed the street once and you got hit by a car, right? And it's important to realize that because a normal range is meant for a population. And the way that they got this was they took a bunch of 18 to say 60 or 65-year-olds, for instance, in testosterone for men, and they took testosterone levels in people who they felt was normal. And they plotted it on a curve, and they took the mean, which is the average, and they took 2 standard deviations out, and then they said that's normal. And why is that important to know? It's important because fundamentally, your normal depends on where you started in that range, right? So I can tell you that the testosterone of a professional male athlete is higher than ours at the same age. Why? Because they're exercising and their lifestyle drives that. Okay, so if you started at a testosterone, let's say, of 27, and that's normal is 9 to 29, if it's at 27, and over 10 years, through many factors like cortisol and others, so suppression, you're sitting at 15, let's just say, okay? So you go to your doctor and you're like, I don't have the same drive, I don't have the same energy, I just don't feel like, for lack of a better word, I don't feel like the man I used to be. And then the doctor's like, okay, sure, let's run some blood work. Well, sorry, Andrew, you're normal, right? And you're like, well, I guess. I mean, I can't really argue with this. But it's not. You're not normal, right? And the same happens with people with thyroid problems or with cortisol problems. It's like you're not necessarily normal, and that's why it's important. Call me old-fashioned, but I think it's still important to talk to patients and not just treat people as a number, right? And that's what some people will do. You'll go and they'll get blood work and they'll just adjust things and not even bother asking how you feel. Because how you feel, honestly, is important. And so that's normal. And so it's important to know that you could be abnormal despite falling in the normal range. Okay? Bioidentical. This is just, anyway, I just wanted to show this slide to show that chemically, for anybody with a chemistry background, that they look very different. Okay, so it's like similar, but not different, but not the same. In actual fact, I should show you some of the estrogen ones from a horse are like they don't even look like even remotely the same structure, and so it's very interesting how they would even fit. Okay, so I'm gonna move towards longevity. And I think Andrew's very excited to hear this because I'm just about to launch this. So, what does longevity mean? Okay? To some people, it means living longer or forever. Yeah, sure. My goal, the way I approach it, is if I can help people live longer, great. But the goal is for me, and I mean me personally, is how can I live the best that I can within the time that I have, okay? So my goal is to be able to live life healthy, enjoying what I do until the day that I die. And why, and if you look at this, so this graph shows the life expectancy in Canada, okay, from the 1920s, First World War, until now. We know that women live longer than men, okay? That's a different topic that I'm not gonna touch on, but we know that, okay? But one of the things, you don't have to look at the whole thing, just look at the general trend. It's pretty good. It's going higher, right? Generally, we're living longer now than we had in our grandparents' days. Okay, here's something that's very interesting. Over the last 20 years, our life expectancy has been pretty flat. Okay? Now, some of you may be like, well, why? Probably the reason is like you get to a certain point, you know, it's like if anybody here is a coder or anybody who works on projects, you know, like the first 90% or the last 10% always takes as much time as the first 90%, right? The law of diminishing returns, so to speak, where as you get closer and closer to perfection, right, or to the limit, it requires much more effort and energy to make drastic changes. Okay, so that's one of the possibilities. But one of the things that I want to note here, there's two things I want to know. One is over the last 3 years, life expectancy has gone down. Yeah, now, part of that admittedly is COVID related, okay? Because lots of younger people were dying with COVID. And so yes, that's skewed, right? Because that's during the pandemic. But is there something else, right? You hear it in the news, the rate of obesity is at an all-time high. The rate of diabetes and the incidence and prevalence of diabetes will outstrip the healthcare resources that we have, right? All of these lifestyle choices or choices that we choose not to make are impacting our health. What's interesting here between these two graphs, right? See, they look similar in terms of their pattern, but you see there's an 11-year delta between them, an 11-year difference. So the graph on the left looks at health expectancy. Okay, and the one on the right is life expectancy, which is how long do you live versus how long do you live healthy and well. And why is that important? That means the 11-year difference between the two is to say that most people spend an additional 11 years not well, which sucks, right? To me, I'd rather just die 11 years younger than live 11 years with like dementia, not being able to care for myself. Do you know what I mean? Right? And I think a lot of people would share that, right? Health. It's really important to make sure that you stay as healthy as you can, as long as you can. And so why do we care about age? Does anyone want to venture? Does anyone want to give an idea? Like, why do you care about age? I know you're going to look at this and cheat, but why? Why do we generally care about aging? Anyone want to share? Okay, I'll tell you mostly we care because age is the best predictor of death and disease. That's the reason, right? If you stripped it all away, that's why we care about aging. We care about aging because as we get older, we realize we're gonna die. And guess what? We're all gonna die, right? I'm not gonna stand up here and say, hey, no one's gonna die. Or some of us will die and some of us won't. We all will die. And as you get older, you start realizing your mortality. Second, right, disease. We know that as we get older, what do we say? Things creep up on us. Oh, my joints don't feel as good. Now I got diabetes. I put on all this weight. And, I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, that's why we care. Now I have cancer, or now I've got diabetes, or now I got high blood pressure. I got a heart attack. Because when you look at it, what's the incidence? If you look at here, right? So this is chronic disease by age. So you look, COPD, which is like if you smoke, usually it's like a lung disease where you can't breathe. The heart disease. Diabetes, cholesterol problems, high blood pressure. All of these, if you look, the blue is older, 70 plus, this light blue, and then the dark blue is when you are 18 to 39. So it's very clear when you look at all of this, except for asthma. Asthma is a chronic disease. But the incidence, the likelihood that somebody has this disease goes up as you get older. I don't think that this is kind of like, I think we all kind of know this, right? I mean, how many 30-year-olds really care about their cholesterol and they say, I got high cholesterol, right? Nobody really. No, rarely do I see heart attacks in 30-year-olds. And the same thing here, right? You look at the incidence of, again, this is deaths per 100,000 people based on disease. Essentially what it says is the older that you get, the more likely you are to have the disease and die of the disease. So that's the reason that we care about age. All right, you look at this, death rates. Okay, one of the things I wanted to show you is when you look at the death rate here, so this is based on like, so these lines are all like different years. So this bottom line here, this purple blue line is like the death rate in the 1800s. And then here, this red line is where we are. Okay, so as you get older, guess what? More people die, right? I think we can all agree on that stat. It's kind of a finality. That's a fact. It's not an opinion. But what's interesting is you look at the spread between this, and it's huge. It's a factor of 11. So within a century, a bit more than a century, we've been able to reduce the death rate at every age by a factor of 11. Pretty good. Why? Well, you know, I blamed the Industrial Revolution and stuff on the cortisol, but quite honestly, it helped us survive longer, right? So we had running water, we got electricity, we've got antibiotics. Okay, those are probably the biggest things that helped increase this. I bet you they probably made up 8 factor of the 11. Okay, just the clean running water and hygiene, the idea of sanitation and antibiotics. And this graph here on the right, on the left, also shows that. You know, you are more likely not just to die in general, but you're more likely to die of some type of disease as we get older. And so this is not meant to be like a morbid talk where like, we're all gonna die. That guy told us you're gonna die. And I was really hoping I wouldn't. Because it's not about that. The point is like, you know, for a long time, I used to be really, I'm gonna give you a little anecdote here. I used to really think about, you know, when the Human Genome Project came about in the late 90s, I was like, oh, this is great. And then they started these companies coming out that could test your genes. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But then I thought about it and I was like, you know, the reason that I never did it was because I always felt that why would I want to know my genes of what I'm potentially at risk for? For instance, an ApoE4, right? Which increases my risk of Alzheimer's by like 8 times. Why would I want to know that, but not be able to do anything about it? Right? My genes are my genes. What am I supposed to do? I can't like go in there and, you know, although right now there are companies out there that'll clip these genes away and take it away. But for the most part, your genes are your genes. Like, why would I know? Why would I want to know that? But it's only now that I realize that actually genes aren't necessarily the most important thing. Okay, so the genes are, and I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about actually why genes are not the most important thing. I'm going to hold that thought. So why do we care about aging and should we care? The idea is like we know that there are things that we can do that accelerate aging, right? There's no doubt. There's lots of data. If you smoke, if you drink excessively, if you use certain recreational drugs, if you don't exercise, if you eat McDonald's or fast food every day, we know that that's going to accelerate aging. We know that, right? And so the reverse is also true. If you make changes to your life, you can alter your rate of aging and thereby your age and your risk subsequently of death and disease. Okay? And so the important thing that it took me a long time to really understand this is the difference between genes, okay, which is your DNA, and your epigenetics. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example, an analogy of what that's like. You see, this is a long run-on sentence. It's not even a sentence. It's just a bunch of letters. Okay, but it actually, if you can decipher it, it actually is, it says something. It says, this is an example of how hard it is to read a sentence without spaces or punctuations. It is impossible to interpret meaning. Okay, so why is this important? Because this is your DNA. This is your genes. It's in this sequence that just goes across. And epigenetics, okay, is how your body decides to read these genes. And that can be affected both negatively and positively. So, funny thing here on the left-hand side, you see the importance of punctuation and spaces. A woman without her man is nothing. Has a completely different meaning than a woman without her man is nothing. Opposite meanings, right? And the reason that that's important is because the idea that I had, which is in this DNA testing where I may have, why would I want to know my ApoE4 gene, my ApoE4 gene mutation? I don't, right? But if there is something that I can do, we are in a place now where we can actually test epigenetics, where we can test things like methylation and phosphorylation of your DNA, and therefore predict how it is being transcribed and how it is being read. Okay? If we can alter that, because we can now, because we know we can negatively alter it, if we could positively alter it, we can now impact how you age. And that's this. How many here have heard of biologic aging? Okay, a few. So what's the difference? We tend to think of age as, very simply, what year were you born, and then what year we are now. But we all know people who are 50 and they look like they're 60. And we also know people who are 50 and they look like they're 40. Okay? And so that's the difference between chronologic age and biologic age. So again, we've established why age is important because it's the biggest predictor of certain things like imminently death. But what's more important is how do you define that age? Okay, and what I'm saying is chronologic age means nothing. We've all known people again who've had a hard life, right? And they've aged, they've had accelerated aging because they grew up in poverty or they grew up in abusive relationships or an abusive family, right? And all of that impacts your age. And so you may be 40, but you're aging at 60, and therefore your risk of disease and death is actually that of a 60-year-old, not of a 40-year-old. And so biologic age is important. And how do you measure that? Through epigenetics. It's through what your body's cells and DNA look like. Right? So there are things like telomeres that we could look at, telomere length and epigenetics and methylation status. Those are important. And it's important to get an idea of what your biologic age is, because again, that's going to be a better predictor than your chronologic age. And then how do we alter your aging process? So we can actually now track this over time. So you could get these tests and say, okay, I'm going to make these changes. I'm going to go with Jake and I'm going to exercise regularly for the next year. And then you'll see what's that done to your pace of aging and your rate and to your actual biologic age. And that to me is why it's exciting and why I'm excited to be able to introduce this longevity program. So the next question that most people will have, or an obvious question would be like, so okay, now I appreciate hormones are important, aging is important, I really should be caring about my age. Why ageless? Okay, so besides what Andrew told you, besides me coming here to speak to you, well, The amount of testing out there that's available is dizzying. There is no shortage of companies who are going to be out there trying to take your hard-earned money for a test. And I always argue, what's the point of a test if you're not sure what you're going to do about it? A, is it going to be actionable data? And B, how do you interpret that? Because if you're not going to make any action on it, why get tested? So part of what I do and what we do at Ageless is I have to go out and I have to vend all of these companies. I have to go vet all of these companies and see like, okay, well, what's kind of like witchcraft or snake oil and what's real and what's going to make an impact for my patients. And so that has value. And then there's the expertise, obviously. Right? I believe in team-based care. I've done this through all of the clinics that I've and businesses that I've started. Team-based care is, to me, the best kind of medical care that you can get. Okay, it's better to have people with multiple specialties look at you and multiple interests, okay, and knowledge, rather than relying on a single super smart person. The second is I lead the program. And so some of the background, I've sort of told you about me, Canadian trained, but in addition, for the last 14 years, I've been able to gain a lot of insight into what's worked and what's not worked. And so, I'm an internal medicine specialist. I do complex care, so all of my patients have multiple medical conditions that need someone to address them all in a unified fashion. And I work in the ICU, right? And so all of that allows me quite a breadth of perspective in terms of both acute and chronic issues. I'm clinical instructor at UBC. And I've done fellowship training in longevity and anti-aging medicine, as well as been a leader in innovative spaces like psychedelic assisted therapies and medical cannabis. And so I'm always looking for ways to address human health that other people may not be all that interested in pursuing, especially in a reactive kind of medical system. So, if you're interested, you can email. It's quite easy, langley@agelessliving.ca, or phone. That's a bit harder because it's a unusual area code, but it is local. Or you can speak to me.